All right. Hello, this is Dr. Goodin. Please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Lots of different options, especially if you're preparing for a dissertation. Things to look into: the dissertation walkthrough or talk through, I forget what I've called it, walkthrough, I believe. The dissertation interview series, which I'll probably change the name of, but that's currently driven to doctorate, and just lots of other options for you. But those are the most meaningful things. Of course, this playlist, and like this video, please, if you like it. If you don't, that's up to you. The point is to help you get this assignment right, and do your best. So let's take a look at the assignment. Here we are, week 12 assignment, write a research proposal. This is the culmination, as it should be, of the entire course. That's the way these courses are generally built, with a signature assignment at the end, and with most of the assignments in previous weeks of the course, week 1 through 11, being preparation for this week 12 assignment, which, if you'll recall, in week 11 you were asked to start outlining this assignment. So as we look at that, we're going to capture the information, the instructions. Prepare a research proposal based upon a topic of interest. Check. All right, be sure your research proposal includes these things. All right, so before you submit anything, go back and say, all right, do I have this? Do I have this, this? Go to each bullet point, make sure you have everything. Sometimes a bullet point can actually include 2 different things. I don't like it. It's not the way I would design it, but that's the way it is maybe right now. So we'll take a look and we'll try to pay attention to anything like that. First, a statement concerning the problem the research study will address, as well as justification and evidence to verify that the problem exists. This is that no more than 350 words section that we've been talking about in past weeks, especially last week. You were supposed to include this section, and maybe you got some feedback, so take what you wrote, implement the feedback, put it here. So it should be the problem to be addressed is, insert the problem, synthesize the justification from at least, I'd say, 7 or 8 current peer-reviewed articles that say the problem is a problem and that it needs to be addressed. I've given plenty of examples of this in the past. On one of the other playlists, the dissertation walkthrough, I believe it's called, you can go to the problem section, and that discusses it in more detail probably than anywhere. But basically you want to synthesize means, let's say you read 2 different articles, and one's from me and one's from my cousin. I don't know. So Goodin 2020 asserted that the intrinsic motivation of STEM students needed to be investigated. Similarly, or let's, instead of similarly, let's say Harris 2019 echoed the sentiments of Goodin suggesting that STEM students are at risk due to a lack of intrinsic motivation. So that's, see how I'm saying how the one article fits with the first one? Indeed, STEM students have been shown to be at risk due to motivational issues. And here's where you might have three different articles that sort of said this. They've got motivational issues. All right, and so let's say this was Allen 2018, Beck 2019, Carter 2020. Okay. Jenkins suggested that the lack of motivation among STEM students could be due in part to the high stress environment of STEM education. I'm just making that up. And Jenkins needs a year, right? Notice I'm only using articles written within the past 5 years, this being 2020. I'm sticking to very current articles, always within the past 5 years of when you're going to finish the assignment or dissertation. So dissertation, if you're planning to start that, you want to use, if it's 2020, you want to start with 2017 to present, something like that. And so this is just an example that I made everything up, but that's sort of how that should start sounding. It'll be about 2 pages. And you can always look down here to see your word count. All right, a purpose statement. So if we were using that problem, which I guess I sort of said there's intrinsic motivation issues among STEM students. So the purpose of the proposed study is to determine how students of different ethnicities let's do socioeconomic status differ, how STEM students of differ with regard to intrinsic and extrinsic, well, we'll just do intrinsic motivation. So here, commonly ethnicity is really, it really obviously doesn't have to do with skin color. It's generally what the people of that skin color have experienced in their lives, where you've often heard of white privilege, where many whites have experienced a privileged life. People of color may have experienced slavery, they may have experienced immigration issues, they may have experienced just being a minority. and there are several things, and so it's important to focus on the socioeconomic factors, because there might be a very privileged black person, there might be a very privileged or underprivileged white person, etc. And so what we really want to focus on is the socioeconomics, which has to do with how much money they've had in their lives, to sort of resources, and education. Those two things are generally the most important factors, I think. They're at least a good start. So here, a list of the research questions, including the hypothesis or hypotheses, if a quantitative or mixed study. I'll just be clear, I don't want anybody doing a mixed study font. It just confuses things. It's not worth it. And we're going to say the same thing to you unless things change dramatically at the dissertation level. So focus on qual or quant, qualitative or quantitative. A list of the research questions, including hypotheses, if a quantitative study. Now, if it's a qualitative study, you will not have hypotheses. That's why it says it that way. A description of the research methodology you've chosen, and a justification of this approach as best suited to address the problem and answer the specific research questions. Okay, so let's say we have our purpose up here. So, and let's go ahead and say that we're going to do a quantitative quasi-experimental study, where quantitative is the methodology and quasi-experimental is the design. Okay? Now, we're asked to have some. I need to know the method and design before I'm going to create my research questions, because they'll use different types of wording, whether they're qualitative or quantitative, and whether they're quasi-experimental or maybe correlational. So let's start making some. RQ1. How do let's say we separate socioeconomic status into high, medium, and low. High, medium, and low SES STEM students differ in terms of intrinsic motivation. That's really the main question, so let's just stick with that. H, we need to make a sub, well, we need a 0 first. So we're going to press Control plus, and then I always forget to say the null is the high, medium, and low groups do not differ. That's the null. There's nothing to see here, basically. And then Control plus to subscript that. The high, medium, and low groups will differ in terms of intrinsic motivation. All right, so here I haven't said how they'll differ. I'm just hypothesizing that they will differ. And there's some literature that you could probably pull together. You don't need to for this, but to support this, these hypotheses. So you were asked, if you do a quantitative study, then you need hypotheses. Description of the research methodology. So let's describe it. Well, that's huge text. Quantitative methodology allows for numeric representation, etc. And you want to provide citation for everything you say about quantitative. 1 to 2 sentences. And then what about this a quasi experimental design allows for associations and whatever. And then cite 1 to 2 sentences again. So you were asked to describe the research methodology and justify this approach as best suited to address the problem and answer the specific research questions. So you might say, SES, well, that's huge again. SES will be a categorical variable, whereas I'm going to call it IM, intrinsic motivation, will be a correlational, not a correlational, continuous variable. In order to determine how SES, how IM varies by SES, a quasi-experimental design is best for I'm just going to make up a name. Bronson, 2008, explained that a quasi-experimental study allows is appropriate to study variance in a continuous variable or variables across levels of a categorical variable. I'll say independent variable. So you're sort of supporting what you're saying. Always support what you say and you'll be good. And not just support it with your own experience and opinion, but support it with citations that are scholarly, peer-reviewed, preferably current, but a lot of this methodological stuff is older. You might see names like Yin, Miles and Huberman, Cresswell, but try to avoid citing Cresswell's textbooks. That's usually not best. So now, have I done what was asked? Justified this approach is best suited to address the problem and answer. So I might say something like a qualitative study would not provide a clear understanding of how IM varies, intrinsic motivation varies by SES in a numerical way. Other quantitative designs such as experimental are not feasible, whereas you can't just experiment and put, oh, you're going to live your life in a high socioeconomic status, this other person's going to live their life in a low social. You can't do that to people ethically. You'd have to find them like pre-birth or something anyway, and so that's not going to happen probably. Whereas, so you'd want to maybe talk about that, cite it. Whereas a descriptive design would not provide information on the variance of IM. So just explain why you chose the design and method you chose. A discussion on the research design you have proposed. Kind of did that already. So I'll put this up here. These kind of go together. A description of the data collection process with justifications to include a discussion of the population and sample technique and any instruments you plan to use, like a survey or interview protocol. Here we're doing a quantitative study, so we most likely use a survey. If we were doing a qualitative study, we'd probably do an interview protocol. Or we probably wouldn't use an interview protocol and a focus group. Better just use one. Survey. We can use a survey and have different instruments. However, we really only need to know two main things, which is socioeconomic status. So we need to ask the questions that will give us that information. Those would be demographic questions. And then we would need to ask questions about intrinsic motivation. The most famous people that study that are DC and Ryan. Check out an article from 2000. They have a big website as well that you can find on self-determination theory, where they talk about intrinsic motivation and other things. And they have a measurement tool for measuring intrinsic motivation. So, a description of the data collection process. So it doesn't ask us about recruitment. So I'm just going straight to, we're going to send them a link to a survey via email. Let's say Qualtrics. It's like SurveyMonkey, but it's one that North Central University currently gives you access to, and encourages, I think, requires you to use. Link to a survey on Qualtrics survey platform. With a section of demographic questions and I'm just going to make this up, I don't remember how many questions, 10-item intrinsic motivation survey from DC and Ryan 2000. Now it asks, what about the population and the sampling technique? The population, which I often say the target population, because that's what you're asked to use in the dissertation. Target population of the proposed study is STEM students at undergraduate students at higher education institutions in the USA, whatever, something like that, using purposive sampling or random sampling or stratified random sampling or another type. Using purposive sampling, 126 participants will be chosen will be recruited to as a sample understudy. Population sampling technique and any instruments you plan to use, which I've mentioned those. You might mention that 126 was the result of the minimum sample size needed as calculated using G-power for a power analysis with 95% confidence, etc. And provide the details of the G-power analysis if you do one. I'm not going to force you to do one, but I'd be impressed. You may have already done one in a previous assignment, so you could pull it over. If you're still doing the same model of study. An overview of the process for data collection and any challenges you envision. Here I've just sort of talked about it. So I would just as previously stated, participating STEM students who agree to participate will be sent a, all right, so one so that's about sampling. One inclusion criteria is that students not be study abroad. Students who are not planning to live in the USA in the next 5 years, something like that. So the study could present challenges in that you think of anything, participants, or that despite being told that the survey data is anonymous, participants may not wish to share information that is personal, like e.g. SES data, how much money their family makes or how much they make or their education levels or So at least list one challenge at least. And don't use this one. An overview. Okay. So now on to the next item, a brief discussion of how the proposed analysis techniques. With a 3-level categorical independent variable, high, medium, low SES, and a continuous dependent variable, intrinsic motivation, which could be lots of different numbers. The goal is to determine the variance of the DV across the levels of the IB. In other words, how do high, medium, and low SES STEM students differ in terms of their intrinsic motivation, if at all? A two-way ANOVA is appropriate for determining variance of a continuous DV across 2 or more levels of a categorical IB, right? Something like that. We're explaining why our analysis will work, and we might even say because this is good to do, a post hoc Bonferroni test will allow more specific understanding of how IM, intrinsic motivation, differs between the 3 groups, high, medium, and low SES. So basically the ANOVA is a big F-test that tells, is there a difference between the groups? Just yes or no. It doesn't tell how there's a difference. So a post hoc follow-up test is what that means, is which doesn't take long, will allow more specific understanding. It'll compare the high to the medium to the low, and the high to the low. So that's what I would suggest doing in this case, in this example. If you're doing a study that's different, you'll need to explain it differently. If you're doing a qualitative study, you need to talk about the type of analysis you're doing, probably content analysis, and the type of coding you're doing, probably thematic coding. I suggest one of the stage or phase, 5 or 6 phases of coding, and you would discuss those here if you had a qualitative study. So you can look for those. Data collection you would collect via interview, and you could get informed consent at the beginning of the interview verbally via recording. Informed consent for a survey, which I probably should have noted in here. Something like at the beginning of the survey, before any questions are asked, participants will be asked to read the consent form and agree to participate or not agree. and leave the survey. Something like that. Whereas informed consent would be different. Target population in a qualitative study would be likely 12 to 18 participants or something like that. In a qualitative case study or something like that. Population and sample could be the same, just going to be a smaller sample, almost always. And you're getting more of a narrative in a qualitative study, so you'd want to discuss that. Okay, and so here, a brief discussion of how reliability and validity or trustworthiness will be maintained. Qualitative, discuss trustworthiness, which is sort of encompasses reliability and validity in terms of qualitative study. So it has four aspects: credibility, dependability, transferability, and did want to grab this. Ooh. All right. So credibility, dependability, and the one I left out is confirmability. So this is taken from the DPDM. Clearly identify the means by which the trustworthiness of the data was established. Discuss credibility. Triangulation is using multiple sources, so you can sort of see how whether they match or don't match or give different perspectives. Member checks is sending the findings to the participants after the interviews, after you've gotten all the interviews done, sending them their findings, the findings of the study to make sure that they feel they have been accurately represented as participants. Transferability is sort of like generalizability for quantitative research. Dependability is whether the method and design could allow the study to be repeated, whether the steps were stated clearly. Confirmability, steps to ensure the data and findings are not due to participant or research bias. So you could avoid this with what's called bracketing, reflexive journaling. So that's qualitative. Now, don't want to write that big. Quantitative, discuss what it says, reliability and validity. And there are different types of reliability and validity that you've already been working on in this course. So face validity, content validity, criterion validity, iterator reliability, and so on. So you're not going to talk about trustworthiness if you've got a quantitative study. So the internal validity of the 10-item IM survey has been found to be good with a Cronbach's, I'm pretty sure, yeah, I spelled that wrong, Cronbach's alpha of 0.86, and we'll put whoever did the study, DC 2017. And then we'll talk about Okay. A brief discussion of limitations and ethical considerations, including how limitations, biases, and ethical considerations will be addressed. Limitations include an inability to know for sure if participants are answering honestly with regard to SES. This will be mitigated, which means a strategy to minimize this limitation by telling the students that the survey is anonymous and confidential. In other words, we won't know it's you, so please tell the truth. It's not like if you tell us you're poor or rich or whatever it is, we're going to go out and tell everybody. We won't know that it's you. So that's a limitation. Think of other limitations and always state how you're going to mitigate them. Coercion is an ethical consideration. In this study, which means, and whatever it means, right? Although professors at universities will allow access to the participants, they will not be sending the recruitment letters for the study. Instead, which could be coercive. It's that power dynamic between a professor and a student. Instead, the researcher or a departmental administrative assistant will make students aware of the opportunity to participate in the study. And that's avoiding one of those ethical considerations, or not avoiding it, but taking it into account and proceeding. And then maybe biases. The researcher is a low SES STEM dropout. The researcher will work with the dissertation chair or something like that, professor, to assure that the evaluation and implication of findings are accurate and not biased by the researcher's personal experiences, something like that. So now we've talked about limitations, biases, ethical considerations, and how they would be addressed. All right, scholarly sources to support your proposal. These are sources you located as part of your, they may not be, right? So this should be mainly in the problem section, but also in supporting or explaining methods and design and sample size, etc. Okay, it is also important that you ensure there is alignment between the components of the paper. So you can't have a problem like problem there STEM students lack IM. Purpose explore extrinsic motivation in STEM students. Okay, that matches on the STEM students, but not on the, we're talking about a different type of motivation. So we want everything to match up. This should be intrinsic motivation. And if we had done intrinsic and non-STEM students, that wouldn't work either. So we need to make sure that the purpose is a logical, explicit response to the problem. Length, 12 to 15 pages. If you've done everything I've asked, you should be well within range of 12 to 15 pages. If you go over, great, that's fine. If you go under, that's not okay. Under is not okay. Over is okay. Smiley faces always help. Your assignment should demonstrate, again, I should see that you put enough work into this, that it's thoughtful consideration, new thoughts and insights that are related directly to the topic. Your response should reflect scholarly writing and current APA standards. Check your paper for errors before you upload it. Check to make sure that you've covered every bullet. And then check to make sure you didn't accidentally plagiarize. No matching content. Always paraphrase. No need for any direct quotes. And cite all claims. If opinion, use possibility language. Like, it could be that students with low SES have not learned to feel confident in their abilities and might therefore not experience IM, intrinsic motivation, as much as they would EM. So whenever you're conjecturing, providing commentary that is your opinion, you need to use this possibility. It could be. However, if you're saying research or students in STEM are likely to experience turmoil on high stakes testing, and then you just move on with your life and write further, they love pizza, which wouldn't be relevant. But if you don't cite this, then you're not really doing your due diligence. We're not going to probably, I don't know, we're not going to cite you for an AIV, academic integrity violation, but you need to cite all claims of fact. You might be cited for an academic integrity violation, but really what you need to be fearful of is just when you say a lot of things that sound like facts and don't have an implied source, a citation, that justifies what you said, saying this is where I paraphrased this information from. If you don't, then you're likely to lose points because you're explicitly asked, as per the tradition, we cite our sources. You're asked to cite all claims of fact, all claims of information, anything we're supposed to believe that is a true thing that you've said. You need to make it very clear. So, for instance, what if we continued this sentence with STEM students often experience high stress, anxiety, and low self-efficacy. Well, here, because it's so similar to this topic, we can assume you're still talking about the Goodin 2020 article. And then Harris, whatever. When you go on, it's pretty clear, as long as you don't get too far away from this citation and the topic stays pretty similar, we are going to assume as readers that you're still elaborating on what Goodin said. You're still paraphrasing from the Goodin article. So be careful with that. If you ever think it's unclear, just put, I'd rather you oversight until you learn the skill than undercite and not provide a citation that's clear. That is it for this assignment. If you've stuck with this video long enough, I hope you've paused it many times. Feel free to go back through. This is an important assignment. It's worth a lot. Let's take a look just before we finish. Does it even say here? I'm not going to pull it up because it will show actual people's grades. Move over. And that assignment is worth 30 points. So really important that you do your best. This has been Dr. Goodin. Please subscribe, like the video if this was helpful. I know it was long. Try to speak quickly. I'm from the South. It's a fight. I wish you all the very best. That's why I do this on my own time. In case you're wondering, today is 12/18. I should be asleep and going on Christmas break. I'm not. I want you to have this. Thank you.